Hi guys, Trenda here. This episode of Bird's Eye View contains the usage of the N word and different variations of the word. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Bird's Eye View, where we connect the past to the present in order to understand what makes the Black community unique. I am your host, Trenda Byrd of ByrdOwlconsulting, and today we are talking about a very touchy subject for some people. We are talking about the N word, or the word nigger. So we're going to be looking at, where did the N word come from? Why is it okay for Black people to call one another that word, but not other people? Do Black people really understand the history and the implications of the word? And we're also going to be looking at, why is the N word popular used in the entertainment industry? And is there a difference between nigger with the ER and nigga with an A at the end? So before I go any further, I do want to let you guys know that for today's episode, I will be using the N word and saying the full word at various times. But I do want you to understand that when I say the word, I am saying it in the context of education. I do not use it socially in my circles, but I know some people do. But today's purpose is to use it solely for education. So before we go into the history of the N word, we're going to hear a quick word from our sponsor. Hi guys, so if you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. For one, it's free. There's creation tools that will allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your computer or from your phone. Anchor will also distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast as well, so you don't have to have a lot of listeners in order to make money. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So be sure to download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Now back to our show. So let's look at the history of the N word. The Latin word for Niger or Niger basically means black. So it stems from the Latin word that basically means black. This word became the noun, which is negro for black person in English. But in the Spanish and in the Portuguese language, negro is basically the color for black. Some people believe the word nigger is a phonetic spelling of the white southern mispronunciation of negro. By the early 1800s, it was firmly established as a derogative name, and in the 21st century, the N word remains a principal term of white racism regardless of who is using it. Over time, racial slurs have victimized all racial and ethnic groups, but no American group has endured as many racial nicknames as Black people. We have been called coons, toms, savages, pickaninnies, mammies, bucks, sambas, jigaboos, and those are just to name a few. Many of these slurs became fully traditional, pseudo-scientific, literary, cinematic, and everyday distortions of African Americans. And these caricatures, whether spoken, written, or reproduced in media and material objects, reflect the vast network of anti-Black prejudice. Now, the word nigger carries with it much of the hatred of disgust directed towards Black Americans and African Americans. And historically, the N word made fun of and ridiculed all Blacks. It is a term of exclusion, a verbal reason for discrimination. Whether it's used as a noun, verb, or adjective, it strengthened the stereotype of the lazy, stupid, dirty, worthless nobody. No other American surname carries as much purposeful cruelty. Now, there are different ways that the N word was used and it is used in its meaning. For example, some of y'all might have heard on TV and television and movies, you might have heard the term nigger lover. Basically, that is a derogatory term aimed at whites lacking in the necessary loathing of Blacks. So a lot of times if whites were to be sympathetic to Black people or seen as being nice to them, then a lot of times white people will call other white people a nigger lover. The N-word did not just affect Black people, okay? The N-word as a word is also used to describe a dark shade of color. So, for example, nigger brown or nigger black. Often it was used as a prefix to alter its meaning when referring to Black people. Nigger is the ultimate American insult. Even when I just say it, it bothers me. It is used to offend other ethnic groups. For example, Jews, sometimes people will call them white niggers. Arabs, sand niggers. Japanese, they were even called yellow niggers. So the word nigger is supposed to be the most insulting form of discrimination. And Americans created a racial hierarchy with whites at the top and blacks at the bottom with the usage of this word. So let's look at how the N-word is used in today's society. Now we're in the 21st century. We're supposed to be in this time where, as Black people here in America, we're supposed to have equal rights and be seen as equal to our white counterparts. You had the Civil Rights Movement, Supreme Court decisions, the Black Empowerment movement. You had civil rights legislation, and the general embracing of democracy by many American citizens that have worn down America's racial pecking order from slavery, moving into the Jim Crow period, and today's institutional racism. Yet, the word nigger has not left, and its relationship with anti-Black prejudice remains symbiotic, interrelated, and interconnected. But ironically, it is codependent because a racist society created nigger and continues to feed and sustain it. But the word no longer needs racism or brutal and obvious forms to survive. The word nigger today has its own existence. So when I mean its own existence, I mean that as the Black culture, Black Americans, we have tried to take this word back and try to make it into our own that's supposed to be, I guess, a term of endearment. I don't know. But I want to look at the difference between nigger with the ER and nigga with an A. Nigga with an A is slang and is one of the most popular words used today. The term is used in today's slang among Black people that predominantly is in the hip hop culture, so rap music. And this outrage of the word being used by Black people was done so to desensitize the derogatory message behind the word. And the term has become so popular that it's now part of the culture, and many other groups, considerably non-Black people, are now using the word as well. So you get into this discussion, which I think is interesting, where the reality is there is not a difference between whether you say nigger or nigga with an A. Changing the letter does not change the root in the history of the word. And changing the letters will not make it okay to use for anybody. The problem with the usage of the word nigga with an A is its roots stemming from the word nigger, which is harsh in its nature. And some things just can't be turned around. You just can't take a negative word and turn it into a positive word by changing its meaning, especially when it has such a negative history tied to it. The root of the N-word still has its imprints. In other cultures, also many of which have used the word nigger against Black people as an attack, now have access to the slang term of nigga. And I think the biggest problem is the fact that Black people, we have tried to take this word and turn it around and use it as a slang. But the problem is you have people out there who are using that word as a derogatory term still. You have the word where you have two different meanings in two different contexts of how you're using it. You even have it where some Black people might say that they are more entitled to the word due to slavery and oppression and racism and segregation of their ancestors, which came along with being called the N-word. And some might say that they've earned the usage of the word because their ancestors died during the Middle Passage and the Civil Rights Movement when the N-word was used for derogatory purposes only. That still doesn't make sense to me, but okay. And then many non-blacks who use the word justified that they are not using the ER at the end of the word and that they don't mean it as a derogatory sense. Yet when upset, many other cultures have used the word nigga with an A as an insult against a person of color. So the slang version of nigger has been used as a derogatory term. So therefore, there's no distinction, there's no difference between the two because both variations have been used as a derogatory term. And in many cases, people who are not black, they feel comfortable using the N-word because other black people use it. So my thing is, black people, we cannot get upset when a non-black person says the N-word because you're using it as well. You can't, there are words out, like you can't say that you can say the word, but I can't say the word, or vice versa. I remember reading this article that was talking about the N-word, and in the article it stated that a lot of non-blacks have stated that some of their black friends gave them permission to use the word in their presence, but without explaining to them that it may be offensive in the presence of others. And therefore, I think sometimes when black people give their black friends permission to use the word, on the flip side of that, a lot of times they might not be giving them the history of the word. So now you have non-black people who don't know the history of the word just going around saying the N-word like it's, like it's an everyday common word. And in my opinion, unless you are using it in a historical context and educational context, you should not be using that word. And I mean, there are plenty of other words that you can use besides that word. Like the N-word is not a term of endearment. Okay, certainly doesn't make me feel good, but I can't imagine how it makes other black people feel. All in all, the word nigger, like the false impressions it incorporates and means, puts down blacks and rationalizes their abuse. The use of the word or its alternatives by black people have not led. And I believe all in all, if as black people, if we keep using the word nigger and just using it, whether we're using it as a slang, whether we're just using it to call each other that, I really do believe we are just playing into our white counterparts and what they want us to be. It's like, hey, the black people are calling themselves nigger already, so they must accept the fact that they're niggers, that they're lazy, that they're stupid. Like, to me, that is the message that we are sending to our non-black counterparts, that when we use that word like that and we just use it all willy-nilly, it's saying that message that we have accepted that we are lazy, that we are stupid. And that is not the case. We are smart, beautiful, educated people. And the N-word just tears all of that away and just takes all of that back. And the reality is, well, let me say this. I don't know if the N-word would ever go away. But I think what we can do is, when you hear someone using the N-word, whether it's with the A or an ER, I think we should take the time to educate our brothers and sisters, educate people, whether they're black, whether they're white, whether they're Asian, whether they're Mexican, educate people to let them know that, hey, this word is a very derogatory word. Because honestly, people, we are not going around and calling other ethnicities, other racial groups, racial slurs as a slang or as a term of endearment. Like, why are we doing this to ourselves? Like, that's not normal. Why are we doing this as black people? Why are we trying to flip a word that's derogatory and try to make it a term of endearment? You don't see any other racial group out there doing that. They don't want to hear those words at all. So therefore, we shouldn't want to hear the worst word out there that is to take away from who we are. So as a solution, I think that we should educate people on the true meaning of that word and try not to use it ourselves. You know, call them by their name. I mean, that's why they have a name. So this is just an introduction to the N-word. And I think for the next season, we're going to make it a series. And what I want to do is I'm going to talk to different groups of people and get their take on the N-word and see how they feel about it. What is their understanding of the history, and just starting this conversation. I think this is a touchy subject, but I really want people to understand and hear what other people have to say about the N-word. And because I know it's really in mainstream, like our music, and people are just throwing this word around like it's a normal thing when it's not. So that's it for today's episode. This is a conversation that I want to continue to talk about. I will do a blog post about the N-word, and I'm also going to be doing a blog post about Black History Month. So just the history about Black History Month and why do we celebrate Black History Month, and what kind of things that you can do and should do during this month. So for some announcements, just remember that my website is live. So you can go and check out all the information on my website. That's where my blog lives. And you can get more in-depth information about what it is that I do with Byrd Owl Consulting. Of course, you can find me all over social media, and I try to put content out on a daily basis, if not a weekly basis. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, I would greatly appreciate it if you were to, of course, subscribe and leave a 5-star review. Tell your friends, especially your educator friends. If you are listening on Anchor, you can actually leave me voice messages. And if you're looking for ways to support the podcast, that'll all be in the show notes. And now that Black History is here, I hope you guys will celebrate Black History and take the time to remember the great accomplishments of not only Black Americans, but also Africans. Because for Black history, it's not just U.S. history, it's also African history. We have to dig back deeper and further than slavery. So if you have any questions or a topic that you want me to dive into, you can always email me at ByrdOwlconsulting@gmail.com and put in the subject line Bird's Eye View Podcast so I know what it's referring to. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you come from. And I will see you guys next week.